Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. I am not one to ever advocate for using the dark web for any purpose other than pure entertainment. And even then, you should keep your curiosity a bit higher on the surface, like at the deep web level. Satiate yourself with the pages that host the dumb conspiracy theories, the adult content that's legal, and the other anonymity-wrapped sites that probably could exist on the surface web right next to Facebook. In the end, the dark web is for illegal activities, not everyday use, and there are too many people out there that have a strange curiosity for it, so just don't, full stop. I want to preface this that I am submitting this story as anonymous for my own personal safety, for a few reasons, but I also want to note that I do not follow the beliefs or mentalities of those in this story. When I was young, I fell into a bad group of people and was pretty much convinced that I needed to hate people because of how they looked, and I want to say that I was brainwashed 100%. I realize now how stupid this behavior and this mindset was, but a lot of younger men out there are a product of their environment, and it's incredibly difficult to not fall into these groups whenever they start to notice you. My anonymity is for two reasons. I don't want people out there to find me now and attempt to cancel me, if you will, because I was an idiot in the past. And two, I don't want these people to find me. That said, I wanted to tell you about one of the things that I found on the dark web once. One of those things that really makes you lose all your faith in humanity. Back when I was younger, probably 10 or so years ago, I used to be the edgy 20-year-old that thought that I was cool because I was hanging out on the dark web and freaky parts of the web. I'm not proud of who I was, and I used to be on some of the boards that most people would see as reprehensible, and I was honestly brainwashed into certain things that I no longer believe. Those boards are seriously filled with some of the most reprehensible people that are of the mind that they are superior in every way. Anyways, in my time on one particular board, I won't name the name obviously as I don't want to give them any clout or traffic, I got in with a very specific group of people. I'll call them the Knights for the sake of this story, but that's not what they were called. For the most part, this group was full of supremacists and other very, very sick people. And while I was sworn into the same ideology of them at that time, these people were a whole other level. I remember that they would discuss high-profile enemies, as they would call them, and they would discuss what they wanted to do with them. Usually, these people were of a specific ethnicity or origin, and usually the conversations would steer quickly towards cleansings. I would typically stay out of these conversations. I would just read what the higher-ups in the groups had to say, and it was never pleasant. Most of the time, these targets would be politicians, local leaders, various TV personalities, and the like. It was pretty clear that this group practically fantasized about harming these people, and they would state their intentions as graphically as they could. Well, this in itself is pretty sickening. It's just words. Yes, words have weight, but if they aren't being acted upon on, then they remain just words. And that's what most of it was. Of course, after a while, some of the posts would slowly morph from angry words towards celebrities to basically doxing people local to the posters. They would go as far as posting photos of people of different ethnicities in their yards, at their homes, including a ton of personally identifiable information, where they worked, their home addresses, what they drove, their schedule, And I remember there was one post where one of the members had actually uploaded a quick video of himself breaking into one of their homes during the day. He mentioned in the video that he did so because he knew that they wouldn't be home. And in the video, he actually trashed their home. He rampages through their living room, smashed their TV, broke mirrors. He seriously just trashed their house, then ran out and got away from the scene. And again, as terrible as destruction of private property was, it got worse. And this is where I personally checked out of the whole thing. There was a post from one of the users that was, I believe, in Texas. He made a post about how he found some people that were out in the open area near the border. And he made it very clear that these were immigrants crossing over. He detailed how he had spoken to them when he found them and how he had told them that they could stay in the property nearby that he owned. He had led them to an abandoned business, again claiming he owned it, and let them in. Then, he said that once they trusted him and thinking that they would be able to lay low in the building, he pulled out a gun and shot and murdered them. He was gloating about how he had seriously murdered a couple of people that were crossing the border, solely because he didn't like them. He was proud of this. This sick piece of garbage was bragging about how he was a murderer. One of the other users posted a comment that told him to prove it and that he would be rewarded if it were true. He then did prove it. He posted several photos of the people with a piece of paper that contained his user tag. Then, he posted a picture of a child and mentioned that he didn't want to shoot the kid, but he didn't know what to do now that she was an orphan. That one user that told him to prove that he'd committed the murders told him that if he could get the child out of the state and a bit north, he knew someone that would pay him for her. I stopped reading the thread after this, mostly because it clicked in me how sick these people were, how disgusting some individuals can seriously be. If anyone is curious, I did contact the police, and I screenshot everything that I had seen, and I got in touch with and then personally met with a local officer. I showed them the page, and I gave them all the information that I had, and I'm assuming that they went forward with it. I have to guess that they wanted to further investigate me, but seeing how I was basically snitching on these guys, they didn't. Like I said before, I'm a totally different person now. I do not believe in any of the ideology that those people touted or pushed. And thinking of what I did believe back then makes me sick to my stomach. To anyone out there that is in with these people or thinks like them, I hope you come to your senses. And to anyone out there that is thinking of hopping onto the dark web, please take this as a reason not to.
This story is going to be a bit technical, and I know that may turn some people off it, but the technical side is important to know exactly what it is that made this such a weird situation for me. I'm going to try and keep it a bit simplified, so my apologies if the techie in me breaks through. For some background on who I am, I do 2 jobs in my daily life: front-end web development and back-end web connections. The first job has me building out websites for users and includes both the coding of the pages as well as the overall user interfaces. The second job has me watching server connections and seeing what traffic goes where and who connects to what. The best way to look at it is like this. If you connect to a website, you're connecting to a web server, most likely in a data center. Those data centers have routers internally, gateways, load balancers, and a bunch of other devices that most home users will never touch in their lives. And a lot of it does something boring. That said, Most people know what a firewall is, or at least that it filters traffic based on rules. Those rules tell you what can and cannot connect, and what to do with traffic that isn't specifically laid out, accept or deny. All that technical BS out of the way, my job requires that I understand how connections happen, and that I need to know how to determine where an IP is connecting from. This comes in handy as I'm able to see that an IP in China is trying to connect to our local government website in Ohio, which typically results in those IPs getting blacklisted. Basically, pinpointing the geographical location of an IP address. It sounds complicated, but a lot of this information is easily accessible, and with a bit of know-how, you can usually get a good estimation of the location. Now, I've dabbled in the dark web a few times, and I like to know what I'm doing. Most of the time, connections on the deep web are encrypted, and it's difficult to find out who is where and what's going on. Most of the time, the people that run dark websites don't have much of a connection to the surface web, but it does happen. There was one time that I ended up on a deep website that wasn't very well built, or at least not very well protected. This site was for Bitcoin transactions and money transfers, and based on what they described, they were used for very specific, very illegal adult content. You would think that they would keep this kind of thing behind good technology, and that you would never have to worry about your data being accessed. Well, you'd be wrong in this case. The site itself had pieces of code that were static, including connections to static IP addresses while checking out. Lesson 1 in security: never hard code anything. Always code with dynamics in mind. Anyways, I pulled what was static in the connections. There were only a couple of IPs. One of them seemed to not respond to traffic at all, which I expected. But the other one, the one that was constantly labeled as home through the code, seemed to be a web server that wasn't locked down at all. I connected to the admin port on the server, and to my surprise, the login information was the default credentials. I was expecting this server to be mostly empty, but as I traversed the directories, I was honestly surprised. Looking at what was on the server, this was the server, the one that was running the payment processing for the illegal content, and they were storing all of the data on this server. There was even an IP access log that they were holding onto, a list of all the systems that had connected and made transactions over the past year or two. As I dug deeper into the server, I found something that honestly creeped me out. There was a directory on the web server that was for a school district's website. This server, that was taking payments for sites that ran very illegal content, was also hosting the public surface web-facing site for a school district. Looking at the information that was saved on some of the pages, it was a school district that taught everything from pre-K through 12 and was down south. My initial thought was that maybe this server was hosted by a third party, but after checking the IP address on the geolocator, it was confirmed that this server was 100% hosted on a static IP address assigned to that school district. The schools probably had no idea that they were passing Bitcoin transactions for such vile content, but someone there knew, and they were taking full advantage of having access to the servers and government-funded IP addresses. I gathered all the information, including how I found the server, what the server was hosting, and how insecure the server was, and took screenshots. I bundled it all up and sent it over to the superintendent of the district, advising them that they needed to look into what was running on their servers. I only ever got one email back, basically saying thanks and that they would look into it. My guess is that they handed it over to the local police, or they did an internal investigation. Obviously, they're not going to tell me the end result. In my head though, the sicko that was taking advantage of the schools like this is in prison.
This story is related to one you've told in the past. You could see it as a continuation or addition to it, and I'm not an author of the story, but I've had a similar experience. The first story in question is the one you've mentioned, I think back in your first dark web video or something, about the kids that ended up on the human meat shop. If any of you don't recall the story, first off, you should go listen to the video. But it was about a group of kids that were messing around with the dark web and ended up on a butchery site that listed human meat and explained how to properly prepare it, advertised their special seasoning, and gave all the information about the specific human cuts. They also touted that they sourced on demand, meaning that they had the ability to get the meat when you requested it, so they had it on standby, and they would kill and cut it when you wanted it. Kind of like Wendy's fresh never frozen promise, but for cannibals. Yeah, it was legitimately some creepy stuff, and what's even worse, it's legitimate. I can actually vouch for how real or genuine the human market is. I don't know about the specific page they were on, it could have been a honeypot, who knows, but there are a handful of actual pages that you can work with to get human cuts. I have actually spoken with people that claim to have eaten human meat, and they've told me that it tastes close to veal, but depending on a person's fitness level, can also taste closer to pork. I don't know about you, but the thought of that makes me gag and want to become vegan. That said, I actually had a bit of a story about another dark web site that was similar, but took it a bit further in their intentions. I'm not going to name the page. I don't want your listeners going out there and becoming man-eaters. Plus, it's super illegal to buy human meat, duh. But there was, and probably is still, a dark website out there that is dedicated to cannibalism, but they see it more as a religious experience than anything. You heard that right. They see the practice of cannibalism as a religious experience. This group of people that are on this page firmly believe that loving thy neighbor isn't enough. You should also gnaw on their shins with a bit of sweet baby rays. Sorry, bad joke. Humor aside, I am being completely serious. The site was built by a group of people, a cult if you will, that held a firm belief that the ultimate act a human could perform to get closer to God was to consume their fellow man. Their ethos basically stated that eating human meat caused a change in your biology and would make you more than human. It said something about how it was basically the way to climb up the food chain, and that the only thing above humans were gods. Thus, being more than human made you godlike. I remember reading a lot of information on the site and thinking, wow, these people are completely and totally insane. But they definitely held tight to their own beliefs and didn't shy away from what they thought. Like I said, this was pretty obviously a cult, and it used all the expected cult language, pushing you to become more than what you are, talking about how their leader was given this message from God himself, and trying to gather more members through a positive reinforcement of their ideology. They had a section where you could sign up for a meeting to come and see what their group was about, which to me felt more like a method of getting more victims. But maybe they were legitimately recruiting people. And much like other pages, they had all the basics, how to prepare the meat, what flavors went best with what parts, how to safely eat your human meat, which is an interesting thought. And there was even an entire section of the page dedicated to their members and their rankings and their favorite activities. It was honestly like an icebreaker page that was made to show that everyday people were also willing to eat other everyday people. Overall, this was a 10 out of 10 on my what the fuck meter. And if I ever disappear after sending this story, you'll know what happened. I just hope that they pair me with a nice salad to balance out the meal. I like to dabble in the dark web every once in a while, mostly for entertainment purposes, but I also like to, well, I'll put it straight, I like to purchase things that are not legal. There are certain things that I purchase that the police would not be proud of. Nothing that's disgusting or anything like that, but I have personal issues that certain substances have helped me with in the past. I'm not proud. I should stop, but I'm not here to talk about my personal habits or be part of an intervention. I'm writing this to tell you about what terrible things I have found on the dark web personally. Now, who am I? Well, I'm in my late 20s, and I'm what one would consider a professional hacker. For the most part, I'm a white hat. I do what I do professionally and within the confines of the law. I used to work for a pretty large corporation as part of their security team, but I've since gone on to be a contractor, and now I just hack away at sites and apps that companies want tested. The technical term is penetration tester, but the layman term is just a good guy hacker. That's not to say that I haven't done my fair share of illegal hacking, accessing systems that I'm not supposed to, getting into databases that should be protected, and shutting down certain people that I didn't care for, and many more. I've never stolen data or sold it or anything, but I've gotten into some fairly sensitive servers in the past. Now, the dark web is a lot harder to hack, so to speak. You need to know how to get to the server. You need to be able to remotely access the said server, and so forth and so on. Because these servers aren't indexed, it's pretty damn hard, and the main way to get into them is to find a vulnerability in an onion site. Again, not an easy task. I mean, come on. These people are on the dark web. They know what they're doing is seriously illegal. They aren't going to operate with a flimsy system most of the time. Walking back to my statement about how I have, and sometimes still do, purchase illegal things on the dark web. There are quite a few marketplaces that exist out there. You all know about the big ones that have just shut down, like Silk Road, but that was just the tip of the iceberg, and they got shut down because they got cocky. I have never worked with any of the big name markets. I like to keep to the little guys, mostly because they're less likely to be compromised. One of the marketplaces that I use ended up going offline, and based on their own statements, because they assumed that they had a snake that was sneaking around, or basically, law enforcement was trying to get into their systems or was compromising their network, hacking them, again, in layman terms. Well, that snake was me. Except, I wasn't doing what I was doing to give information to the cops or anything. I just ended up finding a hole in their security and then exploiting it. I was able to get into their local network, I was able to get into their customer databases, and I was able to actually get into their mail server. You may be listening to this and thinking, okay, so what? Why is this guy bragging about getting into their network and saying it's a scary story? Well, I'm getting there, slowly. The first point to make is that I said customer databases, which, if you think about it, is a problem. These guys were on the dark web and were selling illegal substances for cryptocurrencies. Why did they have a customer data? Why did they have names, addresses, and delivery instructions saved on a network for their dark web service? Well, my good friend, what you may not think about is the fact that these people dealing in illegal sales want leverage over you and those like you. And while they say that they don't have your information, a lot of them do. They save that data and they will use it to lessen their sentences if caught, or they will legitimately just sell you out if they think that you're a problem. I'm only adding this in to be a deterrent to those of you that think you'll go out to some dark market and buy drugs or weapons. They save your data, they know who you are, and they will use it if they think it will benefit them. Now, the real scary part of what I found was in their mail server. These messages were routed pretty much internally. There was no external traffic, and these were set up so that only the two people in the communication could ever touch or see the message, unless you actually got into their internal server and subsequently into one of the accounts. The first few messages weren't that interesting. They were just about business dealings. They mentioned that there were people that they wanted to get off the service. They were even talking about compromising another marketplace. And it wasn't until I got into one of their conversations, marked as synthetic testing, and that stuff got freaky. The first message explained that they had a new product that was being lab synthesized, but they didn't know if it was any good, or if there was anything negative about it. The response basically said, "Screw it, sell it anyway." The first sender stated that they didn't want to sell it to the normal clientele as it may harm their reputation and thus their sales if it wasn't a good product. They then asked the second person to find a test subject and followed that up with, "Find someone young and healthy, preferably someone in their teens. I think that way we can get the best results, less likely to be tracked. Do you still have your connection?" He said he did, and that he could have 2 or 3, and in his words, children, lined up and ready to go within a week. These guys were seriously going to be testing drugs, lab-synthesized drugs on children and teens to see if they were any good. And the more that I dug into it, the worse it got. There were conversations for this. There were conversations about weapon transfers, and there was even an entire chain that claimed that they had a potential in with a company that developed medication, and that they may be supplying their subjects to test new, still being researched, medications for a company in another country. Basically, underground testing for non-FDA approved medications. Unfortunately, I didn't have any way to pull the information from the server, and I didn't have the ability to save it locally, so there wasn't a whole lot that I could do without incriminating myself. I ended up documenting information by hand as best as I could, and I went to submit an anonymous tip. By the time that I went to do so, they had gone offline, and apparently, while I had gotten in, and I was properly secured, my access was logged, so they knew that someone had seen their information. My guess is that this set off alarms, and they moved on to another network, location, onion linked, and etc. I wish I could say that I learned a thing or two from this, but I'm a stubborn idiot, and I still do business on the dark web. The only thing I learned was that I don't personally want to know what the hell goes on out there. Not anymore than what I personally need. And here are the top comments from my last video. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.